Good morning and welcome to the morning after the night before, and it's a difficult morning, isn't it? I did a quick short after the game last night, reflecting on the game, uh, and it was difficult. It was a difficult game going to Brighton, and it's really difficult going there as well when you've got very limited options. Defensively, three players out in Timber suspended. Tomiyasu and White meant to shift to Party at right back. Odegaard clearly unwell, and you could see that when he came on, just not well enough to play in the game. He really, really struggled with the minutes he had. And then going forward, no Raheem Sterling, no Kai Havertz, who was ill, no Bukayo Saka. That led to limited options for Arsenal. That's six, important players out for Arsenal. Not all starters, but when your starters out, you want your backup available. Um, and it's a difficult ground to go to Brighton. But if you want to win the league, you've got to pick up at least 4 points in the two games against Brighton, and we've picked up two. And ultimately, I think it tells a story of a season. I'm going to touch on that later. But just to go into the game, Arsenal, obviously, I've talked about the limited options. That meant Partey at right back. I know people rile against it. I don't like it. But when you've got three right backs out and you're having to play a midfielder there or another option there, I can't really fault the manager for having to go to that. People have said you could move Miles Lewis-Skelly there and Calafiori comes in, Partey in midfield. I don't think it necessarily makes a big difference. Miles Lewis-Skelly is left-footed and he is a midfielder. He's never played at right back and he's been going up against players of the quality of Mitoma. I can understand why that decision's not made. And you just got to hope that White or Tomiyasu get back soon to support Timber down that flank. The midfield was combative with Moreno, Jorginho, and Rice. It always lacked creativity. That creativity had to come from further forward, but with the forward options limited with the injuries there as well, it is difficult. But Arsenal did control the first half. It wasn't pretty. I don't think it was ever going to be pretty. Arsenal, with the lack of creativity there, always going to struggle. Brighton, too good a side to make things easy for Arsenal, but they did get ahead. Wanyeri with a lovely piece of play, really direct running at the Brighton defence. I think they thought he was going to square it, but he didn't. He ran directly at them and put the ball in the far corner with a lovely finish. And I was really optimistic at that point. I thought, you know what, if we can hold this, and I always thought it was going to be a hold rather than go and batter Brighton at 6 points from two really tricky away games. Second half, Arsenal weren't great. They really weren't. Brighton definitely the better side, but they get the goal. Get the goal in really, if I'm being charitable, unusual circumstances. I still struggle to see how that's a penalty. I know there's a lot of people out there saying, well, he's missed the ball and he's headed them. If he'd done it with his feet, it's a penalty. I think there's a difference between a head and a foot making accidental contact. I think that happens, once or twice a game, generally speaking, where people sort of collide heads a little bit. I think that's all it is. Arteta said Saliba touched the ball. It doesn't look like he did. Whether he did or not, I think is kind of irrelevant to some extent to me, because I just don't think that you can give a penalty for that. It's a bit like the Rice sending off against Brighton earlier this season, where he's tapped that ball away. Yes, by the letter of law, yes, it's a yellow card, but we've not seen it since for that level of kicking the ball away. And I just don't think we'll see this penalty again. So I think Arsenal can justifiably feel hard done by that decision, especially given the fact that there's an accidental tangling. I mean, he slightly gets his arms around him as well, but it's a trip O'Reilly has on Gabriel early on in the game. It sends Gabriel down from a corner where Arsenal could have had a penalty. If you're going to say that, well, it's accidental, you can't really, it doesn't matter, you've got to give it. Well, it's got to be true at the other end. But I think you have to also reflect that Arsenal probably didn't do enough to win the game. I think that killed their momentum. I think that sort of gave Brighton belief. I think it was an important factor in the game. I really do. But ultimately, Arsenal still have to be doing more to win the game. So I think you have to turn around and say it's a fair result, 1-1. and Arsenal got what they deserved. So where does that leave Mikel Arteta and Arsenal? It's been an odd season. I've said all season that I believed Arsenal can win the league this season. I've said all season that Arsenal need to win something this season. They really, really do, and it probably needs to be a big trophy. That's looking less and less likely now. And I think there are some mitigating circumstances there, but I also think there are things that Arsenal will have to look at themselves if they are trophyless, or even if they just win, say, the League Cup, which in some ways would be progress, but probably not the progress we kind of want. We kind of want more as a fan base, and I think that's understandable. So let's just cover the mitigating circumstances, because I think they are important when you're considering and reflecting on the season, particularly if you're trying to take the emotion out of it. When you put the emotion in, you're going to call it excuses and all that, and that's perfectly understandable. I think, the fan side of me says I don't care about that. I just want the trophies, but I think the rational side of you have to consider it. And I think there are two circumstances really around this season, maybe three. I think the first is the injuries. I think they have had a significant impact on Arsenal this season. They've been consistently carrying 5-6 players out. And I hear criticism that the squad isn't big enough. I think the squad is big enough. I don't think you want 27, 28, 29 players. We saw Chelsea and the issues they've had when they've been carrying too many players in the squad. This season they can kind of get away with it because they can play one team in the Conference League and one team in the league and get their minutes that way. When you're in the Champions League, you can't go out and play your B team and expect to do well. So I think that's going to come to bite Chelsea if they don't do anything about it. So I think Arsenal's squad size is the right size. I think it is bigger than, as big as most teams in the Premier League and bigger than some, including Manchester City's, when you factor in the fact that 3 of our players that are in our squad, including Tommy Setford, who's our third choice goalkeeper, don't need registering because of their age, but Ranieri and Miles Lewis-Skelly have clearly shown that they are capable of playing at this level, and they're not registered because they don't need to be. I think, though, it is a little bit unbalanced, and I will touch on that when I sort of talk about the bits that Arsenal have to take responsibility for. I think the second thing here, and again, I think this is a two-way sword, is the transfers. The summer wasn't a shambles. People talk about it being a shambles. It's not a shambles. It just wasn't as good a summer as we'd have wanted. I think some of that genuinely is PSR related. Arsenal was saying all summer that it was going to be a floor raiser rather than a ceiling raiser type of window, by which they meant we're going to be adding squad players that are affordable rather than big lights out players, because we had 2 or 3 areas we'd need to cover given the fact we were making sales to the likes of Emil Smith-Rowe and Nketiah. And I think it was a difficult summer all around when you look, not many top players left, and it's why I always felt the league would be won with less points this season, because I felt the sort of teams 4th to 10th, the players were there for them to improve more than the sort of top 2 or 3 teams in the league. And you saw that with City had one signing, Liverpool no signings, Arsenal 3 I think it was, 2 permanent, wasn't it? Calafiori and Moreno, and then 2 loan signings. I think that was it. I don't think I'm missing anyone. But anyway, you get the idea really. But then I will again touch on where Arsenal could have done more there. But I think that meant they couldn't land their number 1 targets. A lot of them wanted to stay where they were. And I think that has been a factor. But again, I'll touch on that more in a second. And then I think the third factor, and I've got to credit Gunner Blog, James McNichols from The Athletic for this one, because he's been talking about it for a while. And it has been nagging away at me, which is to win a league, you need that element of luck. You need decisions to generally go your way. And I think Arsenal, it hasn't gone their way largely in the season so far. And generally my view is that these things sort of even out over the season, but they don't seem to be sort of doing that. The injuries continue. The strange refereeing decisions continue to be. The playing teams, just as they hit form, sort of seems to be favouring Liverpool, where they play, players like Manchester United when they're bang out of form, and we get sort of teams in form, generally speaking. Arsenal, to be fair credit, haven't used that as an excuse, but I think it is a genuine factor. And you just think, well, if that had gone differently, would Arsenal be in a different position now? And I think they probably would. But ultimately, they aren't. And I will, again, just give you a conclusion in a minute. But I think the other side of those three things, and they are important things to consider, are the fact that Arsenal have looked inept going forward. Defensively, I think they've been actually really quite solid given the injuries there. They've been quite significant. There's been a lot of personnel changes there. I think we've played, 10, 11 different back fours this season. That's always going to be a struggle. Um, you know, and you can see the injuries, how they impacted Manchester City or Tottenham, and in particular this season, as well as us. And actually, we've probably ridden it out better than those two. But they have been a factor. But going forward, Arsenal, I think, have looked unimaginative. I think they've looked devoid of ideas. And I think some of that has to be on the players, taking responsibility of the pitch. But ultimately, that falls to the manager. And that's where Mikel Arteta will have to look at himself and say, could I and should I have done more? And I think the answer, unfortunately, for Mikel Arteta and Arsenal is yes, you could. I think the other factor where Arsenal could have done more is in the transfer window. I said after the summer that the squad size was fine, but it was slightly unbalanced. There was one too many defenders, one too few attackers. If you took, say, Kieran Tierney out of a squad, and I'm using him as an example because it's clear he's going to be leaving, and put in an attacker, any attacker, doesn't have to be a star. Let's call it Burma, who I think is a really good player, or Jonathan David, or a squad player into that attack, or didn't let Emil Smith Rowe go. I think it's probably the right decision for Arsenal and Emil Smith Rowe to let him go. I don't count Vieira. I just don't think he was good enough. But something like that, I think your squad is balanced, and I think that will probably give you a few more ideas going forward. And that's where Arsenal will have to take responsibility if ultimately they end up trophyless this season, because there are two areas where they could have done more. So what do I think this means for Arsenal really quickly, because this is 12 minutes, and I hadn't really thought this through beforehand. I am just doing this off the cuff as usual. What does it mean for Arsenal going forward? I think ultimately, and I've said it for a while, Arsenal have to win something this season. You can't go trophyless for 5 seasons. I think the project, as Arsenal call it, has gone well in terms of recovering us from where we are to where we are now, genuine improvement. But it has to mean something, and meaning something isn't just competing anymore. That's great, but it has to be about winning trophies. And I think if Arsenal do finish the season with no trophies, they have to take responsibility for that, despite the mitigating factors. If that's a League Cup rather than the Premier League, I think you can probably take the mitigating factors and say, not the season we wanted, but yeah, I can understand that. But if it's nothing, that's a real problem for Arteta and Arsenal. He asked for the 5 years. Well, this is your 5 years. You look back and say, what happened if you hadn't had that Williams season where we went backwards? Where could we be now? And, it's a road not taken, right? Every team gets things wrong, and ultimately you take responsibility for that, and it's happened, and you make those decisions and you have to live with them. Since then, I think it's gone much better, but it has to mean something. And if at the end of the season Mikel Arteta is trophyless, I think he can have zero complaints if he is no longer in his job. And Arsenal look to get someone different in the hope that that gets them there. I do, however, ultimately think that this side and this manager are good enough to win something. I look at the 2024 stuff. We were first or second for goals scored, top defensively, got the most number of points. I think that shows the squad can do it, but it has to do it. And at the moment, it isn't delivering the trophies. I think probably the league has gone now. We'd expect Liverpool to increase that lead today, potentially to 11 points if they also win their game in hand. That's a long, long way back. It's never been done before. That said, I think an injury to Salah could really, really impact them badly. So I think Arsenal probably have to target the domestic cups. I think the Newcastle games, they have to be the priority. If that means you drop a couple of points in the league because you're resting players, and ultimately Arsenal are probably going to have to rest some players because of the fixture schedule, then I think you're probably going to have to take that risk, because I think the silverware is the most important thing this season, and it pains me to say it. And I think the other thing the club have to do if the money's there, and I think the money will be there to some extent. I don't think it's there to 150 million for Isak, and I don't think you should do that anyway, much as I love Isak. But they have to support Arteta in this window now. They have to get him an extra attacker in. It is getting desperate. So there you go. In summary, I think mitigating circumstances for the season, sure. Arsenal, could they have done something different? I think so, and they have to take responsibility for that. But ultimately, if this doesn't end in a trophy this season, Mikel Arteta, a manager I believe in, can have no complaints if he loses his job. And, you know, I would 100% support the board if they were to say, do you know what, Mikel, thanks for the job you've done. It's time to go. But hopefully we won't be there. Hopefully we'll win a trophy or two, and that will be that. Anyway, thanks all so much. It's been a long video. Please like, subscribe, please share if you can, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thanks. Bye.